webinar, I would like to introduce my speakers for today. We have been joined by Mr. Michael Williamson, who is the Section's Chief Energy Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, UNESCAP, Mr. Ishtiaq Bari, Head of Research Change Initiative, Ms. Dalima Noor Ramadani, Climate Policy Coordinator, Sustainable Energy Access Institute for Essential Service Reform, Ms. Mariana Esbiado, Senior Research Analyst at Wood Mackenzie, Brazil, and Ms. Zainab Naeem, who is the Head of Center for Ecological Sustainability and Circular Economy, STPI, and Dr. Khalid Walid, who is the Research Fellow at STPI. So before to delve into the discussion, I wanted to introduce some housekeeping rules. The session is being recorded at social media's platform of STPI, and we have opened the question and answer session where you can pitch your questions regarding the panelist and what do you know about them, and you can raise your hands also during the discussion as well. So before going towards the further proceeding, as we know that under Article 4 of the Paris Agreement, the countries are globally required to submit their nationally determined contributions every 5 years to set their pathways for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and strengthening climate resilience. Recently, right now, the countries after the Paris Agreement have submitted their two NDCs 1.0 and 2.0, which showcase their ambitions towards the climate change and their actions that what they have to achieve for the mitigation and adaptation purpose. But right now, as we are expecting, we are crossing the deadline in February 2025. Countries have to submit their NDCs 3. So every country is right now preparing their NDCs, and out of 196 countries right now, only 13 have submitted their NDCs. So this webinar is here. We are here to discuss that what are the strategies that could be developed to clear sectoral roadmaps, ensuring transparency, accountability in NDC 3.0, and how we can access the climate finance through carbon markets, green bonds, and internationally transfer mitigation outcomes regulations. How we can emphasize the vulnerable communities, women, youth, and how we can more be adaptive to the resilience strategies in the global south, and also how we can make a debate more centralized around the MRV system for the real-time emissions tracking in South Asia, and how the best practices can be adopted in that context as well. So for this, I would request for the welcome remarks to Dr. Khalid Walid. Yes, sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Saleha. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Michael is here. Marina is here, and Miss Ramadani is here, Zainab is here. This is very important, particularly in context of Global South. I would say I cannot stress enough that Global South and Global North, keeping in mind this climate injustice, now keeping in mind the global politics as well, this the gap between the Global South and Global North is widening. So that we can ensure inclusive development as well as inclusive implementation of NDCs, as rightly mentioned by Saleha as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scene in a way that experts can delve into detail how we can sort of bridge this gap between ambition and implementation of NDCs. We all know that NDCs, they are a document with higher side of ambition, and maybe when it comes towards the implementation, we all know that there are challenges, and these key challenges, if we see the previous NDCs, you'll see that particularly in Global South, we lack clear sector specific pathways, maybe actionable roadmaps, because we have a dichotomy between our economic development plans and climate ambitions or climate plans. So one challenge is that this dichotomy should not increase, which we are seeing that it is increasing day by day due to this geopolitical and economic reasons and economic turmoil, particularly in Pakistan. Second major challenge that comes in mind is issues with data. And when I say data, first thing is that we need quantitative targets, we need quantitative assessments. Second, most important is that this data that is available and that is being employed to set these target and their implementation will depend on the transparency and accountability of data. That would be very essential for effective implementation of NDCs. The third challenge that I see is that we need to sort of look into more uh, like market-based approaches, for example, building economic engines in front of these sustainability and environment planning. One thing comes in mind that economic prosperity should be linked with climate prosperity. Maybe in that way, we can mainstream NDCs and broaden its scope. Uh, Another challenge, particularly coming from Pakistan, is policy silo, which means that NDCs are being made. Obviously, this time around, the consultation process of NDCs is have been broadened. Its scope has been broadened. There are provincial discussions. There are discussions with different sections of the societies. But in terms of building uh, inclusive, integrated NDCs which sort of complement the development plans, we need to be it make it in more whole of system, whole of society approach. And when I say whole of system, whole of society approach, it means that different ministries they should come up and they should sort of have cohesive strategy in terms of implementation plans of NDCs as well. This will include uh, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning in Pakistan, Ministry of Planning and Development, and special initiatives, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Industries. And then another integration that is required is we need to have third tier of the government, that is the local government system, which is lacking in Pakistan. I'm not really sure about the global south, but still, majority of the countries they will have this the lack of third tier of the government, which is very essential for implementation of these NDCs. Uh, Another thing that the previous NDCs built that was built upon three things: public and private partnerships, uh, internal resources, and what is the level of external funding that would be available in terms of conditional financing. This time around, I guess it should be the public-private partnership model should be extended to by adding another P in it. That would be people-private-public partnership model. And I have intentionally uh, arranged these three Ps, and that is people, private, public, because it should be climate vulnerability centered, community centered, people centered, so that uh, the approaches, the implementation plan, it sort of benefits the people, particularly those who are economically and climatically vulnerable in Pakistan and the global South countries. Uh, Youth and marginalized group would be should be the priority. How Another challenge is that how we need to integrate these sections of the society. Next thing that comes in mind is the institutional mechanism uh, for the formulation and its success as well. If, as Saleha mentioned, that we need a monitoring, reporting, and verification uh, framework so that we efficiently implement these NDCs, we need to come up with a stronger, more cohesive institutional arrangement. I give you example of Pakistan. Pakistan right now is in IMF program and negotiating a resilience and sustainability facility as well, which means we will be taking a loan to strengthen our institutional arrangement as well in terms of climate governance. So that should go hand in hand. How climate shocks are being translated to macro critical aspects of the economy that could be studied uh, with a greater detail, but it would be only possible if there are plans that are being made with an integrated approach. For example, a development plan includes a climate plan, and it should reflect in NDCs as well. Another thing that has been recently agreed upon and negotiated at COP29 is the Article 6 modalities. Now, NDCs, they are a tradable commodity. Maybe that framework can be used, and that can be used to translate higher ambition to higher implementation and higher actionability of NDCs. For example, if Article 6.2 and 6.4 in terms of ITMOs that have a sustainable and efficient framework, if a country exceeds or have a surplus of targets in terms of NDCs, it can trade to countries which have a shortage of or lacking in terms of climate targets. So maybe that could be another incentive-based scheme in which through we can sort of bridge this gap between ambition and uh, actionability of it. Next thing, I guess, uh, maybe keeping the geopolitical background landscape of the world in mind, maybe there is a need to have broader South-South cooperation, as COP30 would be in Brazil. Maybe South-South partnership that can be developed, particularly in terms of understanding what are different landscapes, multi-level partnerships that can be fostered and have implementation on it. Lastly, I would call upon my friends from different countries so that uh, we can have international best practices that can be implemented in the very context of different countries. So it is not just that we implement international best practice from one country, take it from one country, and just implement it in a particular country. We need to first understand what is the context of it, what is the very economic or socio-economic context of it, what is the cultural context of it. Then the international best practice should be implemented. My 3 cents would be that the developmental priorities should be aligned with our climate ambition and climate goals, so that these NDCs, they have an economic engine in front of it. They have a inclusive impact on the society, and they sort of generate this equitable, inclusive, and sustainable growth. Without this, our building and green economy, sustainability, I think maybe this gap between ambition and uh, implementation that will broaden. We need to sort of contain it. And maybe one thing is that we adopt this integrated approach where South-South cooperation and uh, a multi-level, holistic, whole of a system, whole of a society approach that can generate these implementable NDCs. Looking forward to uh, a great debate, a discussion. Obviously, this will result in a solution-oriented uh, document that can be a torchbearer for spotlight for the better implementation of NDCs. Thank you so much again. Looking forward to an insightful, solution-oriented discussion. Back to you, Sal.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Khalid, and very rightly highlighted that we have, the countries have submitted before two NDCs, NDC point 1.0 and 2.0, but both NDCs were not, most of the countries that were not inclusive, and this time the countries should focus on more like they more on the economic and climate prosperity perspective as well. So after the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement as well, so countries have to be how look into the perspective that how they can make the internationally transferable mitigation outcomes more inclusive, and how they can learn from their best practices from one of the best examples the countries have set on the ambitious targets as well. So with this, now I would move towards our next speaker for the keynote address. I would request Michael Williamson for his keynote address. Yes, over to you.
Hey, thank you very much. It's great to see everybody from SDPI and other colleagues online. Thank you so much for inviting me to open the webinar today, and greetings from all of us in Bangkok. So this week we have the Asian and Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development here in our building. There's about 1,000 people here from all different countries across the region. So quite a lot of excitement and debate happening here as well. but it's great to take a bit of time out from that and talk to you and really try to preface your discussions with some remarks. So let me try and set the scene for you with a couple of thoughts. So at the outset, as we heard from Dr. Khalid, the NDCs are the key element, the building blocks of international climate cooperation architecture. And for countries of South Asia, upscaling their commitments under these new NDCs is really quite challenging. If we look at the Asia Pacific region holistically, the last round of NDC commitments, NDC 2.0, the collective commitments across the region would have seen emissions rise by 16% from 2010 levels if they were all implemented. So that's a long way short of the global 45% reduction that we need to stay within the 1.5 degree temperature limit. One thing that ESCAP is doing is we have something called an NDC partnership that offers support to countries developing their NDC 3.0. And if any of you are interested, of course, I can put you in touch with the colleagues working on that. But, as you all know, and especially those of you sitting in Pakistan, you're very aware of this. Climate change is such a grave challenge. We cannot even think about failure. We really have to think about success. We know that the costs of climate change are real. It's not something theoretical or in a report. You have the insurance company Swiss Re. They said that economic damages from natural disasters doubled over the last 2 decades. And last year it was 280 billion globally. And a lot of this is from climate change. So in Pakistan, you had firsthand experience with the 2022 floods. We all saw that around the world on TV screens, a 7-fold increase in monsoon rain, 40 billion in damages. So this is quite real. I don't think I need to convince anybody listening of that reality. But when we talk about meeting this challenge, we need to consider carefully all of the tools in the emissions reduction toolbox. And my personal belief, and maybe this is because I'm an energy person, I believe that many of those tools are found in the energy sector. And of course, this is closely linked to each country's particular political, geographical, and resource endowment factors. So we're talking about tailored solutions rather than universal prescriptions for NDCs. But also we must generate realistic solutions that are based on available technologies, and we shouldn't hope for illusory breakthroughs. So I think now is not the time to engage in wishful thinking or maybe even engage with some of the time delaying tactics that we might see from vested interests. So we do need to be open in the search for energy solutions, but at the same time apply some degree of skepticism towards ideas such as CCS and even hydrogen. So as I mentioned, energy is at the heart of the climate emissions problem. It accounts for about 80% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in the Asia Pacific. And so when we're looking at these new NDCs, a lot of the content will relate to energy in one shape or form. And the traditional way that we think about energy is about supply side and demand side, these two halves of the equation. On the supply side, we talk about renewables. Let's switch to less carbon intensive fossil fuels. And then on the demand side, we talk really about energy efficiency. And that covers appliances, buildings, industrial energy efficiency, transport systems, those kinds of things. But now as we're in the middle of this technology revolution, we have to think about technologies and systems that straddle both these worlds, which you might call the clean energy ecosystem. So that would be things like energy storage, like smart grids, advanced forecasting, load shifting, and even cross-border power grid connections. So these are some of the other things that exist in the ecosystem. And while I mentioned these, we haven't even realized the impact of future technologies such as digitization and the AI. So these will have an impact as they roll out. So while we're talking about the energy system, it's really the electricity sector, that electricity part of the energy system is the most important for decarbonization. And I'll explain why in a moment. But I think over time, we should view electricity systems in the countries where we live. These should become the crown jewels of national infrastructure because they play such a pivotal role in economic growth, in human well-being, and in decarbonization. And this is particularly relevant for Pakistan because, as you all know, the challenges of circular debt in the power sector are really acute and real challenges. But for Pakistan, putting the power sector on a firm footing, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, but ultimately it's worth doing because this is really important for Pakistan's decarbonization journey. I think there's a few reasons to focus on electricity as the pivot to a low carbon future. Firstly, electricity is a very fast part of the energy mix. So if we look at overall electricity consumption in the Asia Pacific over the last 20 years, it grew by 246%. So you might say, well, this is expected because we're using more energy in this region every year. But if we compare that to overall energy growth, that was 127% for the same period. So we see electricity demand is growing at twice the rate of overall energy demand. And this really is before we've properly entered the EV revolution, because as we electrify transport, vehicles, cars, buses, this will really accelerate that trend remarkably. So one can see the greater role that electricity is playing in our energy mix due to its uniqueness. It's quite a unique fuel. We can create electricity from many different primary energy sources. We can move it over long distances. We can use it in a variety of ways. We can make steel, we can cool homes, we can run appliances and drive cars. So therefore, it's becoming bigger and a more strategic part of the energy basket. We're going to electrify more end uses, and economies will diversify their structure so that they will use more electricity to generate their GDP. So in many cases, this process, this electrification process, it actually increases the efficiency of energy use. And just some examples would be heat pumps, electric vehicles, switching over to electric pumps in industry, and electric cooking. So this electrification and increased energy efficiency is supportive of NDCs in ways that can be economically attractive. And the other important thing, the other reason about the strategic nature of electricity is that with electricity, we have more opportunities to bring in renewables compared to things like heat or transport. So in this context, we're talking about solar and wind. These are the technologies that are leading the charge in terms of cost competitiveness. But in South Asia, hydro is still a major bedrock of renewable power generation, and that will continue. And the last point to make about electricity is that when we have surpluses and deficits, we can share those between countries through power grid interconnection. So this is going to increase the flow of green electrons in both directions. It will reduce costs, and it will trigger the construction of new renewables projects as we open up these markets. And just to give you one example, Pakistan has identified a wind resource of 50 gigawatts in just one of its wind corridors, in the coastal wind corridor. So if that could be developed, this electricity could be shared across the SAARC regions in times of surplus, and that could be complemented by seasonal inputs of other types of renewables into Pakistan. So this description brings us really to the challenge of how to bring this vision of a future diverse low carbon system. How do we use that ambitious vision to create more ambitious NDCs? And if we simplify or maybe oversimplify the low carbon energy challenge, we could put it a bit like this. Renewables are hostage to finance. This is quite clear to us. Energy efficiency is hostage to government policies and regulations. When we talk about power grid interconnection, this is hostage to the relations between countries. So to us as individuals, these problems seem quite big and quite insurmountable. And this is an oversimplification, of course, because to build up all of these areas, we need well-crafted policies and incentives across the clean energy ecosystem. We need initiatives to mobilize public and private finance, improve technical capacity across our governments, and to manage the social impacts of changes to existing industries. And that list can go on. So the development of this new round of NDCs, it really allows countries to take stock of new technology developments and falling costs since the last time these documents were developed. So the time is right for more radical thinking, more ambitious thinking, and stronger action on sectors such as energy efficiency, electric vehicles, energy storage, and solar power. And many of these sectors are path dependent, and so this relates back to the ambition. For example, if we have sufficient scale up in industries such as wind, solar, or electric vehicles, the local manufacture or assembly becomes possible, and that boosts the economic and job multipliers. We have an electric vehicle revolution underway. We can see it here in Thailand, where I am, where the Thais are really investing in batteries and electric vehicle production. But I think there's a real opportunity for governments to ensure that public transport system become dominated by EVs, where the benefits are multiplied. These are some of the quick wins for NDCs. But here in South Asia, we can see the growth of regional green technology supply chains as something that we should strive for, along with more cooperation on carbon trading, on technology transfer and energy trade. So countries can't achieve this ambition without international support and without the regional cooperation that I mentioned. Carbon markets, blended finance, and concessional loans are some of the financing mechanisms you'll be discussing in the panel a bit later. But there's also need for capacity enhancement, better data, and ways to engage communities, youth, and civil society. And I think youth is coming out more and more in the debate, and this is really important. When we talk about things like relations between countries, I think it's really the youth that can reset a lot of the dynamic in South Asia to really make countries work together in cooperation on this challenge of climate change, which is bigger than all of us. So I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to your discussions. So back to you, Madam Moderator.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael, and very rightly highlighted that the countries have to be this time need a more tailored approach in terms of their energy, in terms of the economic and environmental context, because the developing countries have challenges around the economic stability. So this time the NDCs must address the challenges of the economy of the communities, and also of the different sectors, whether it's energy sector, industrial sector. So there must be economic or business case for that, so that the NDCs should be adapted at a very ground level by each and every community. With this, now I'm opening the panel discussion, and I would request with my first speaker, Mr. Ishtiaq Bari. Sir, in your country's experience, what you have been seen that you have that two of the NDCs have submitted, and this time, how do you see that? What are the gaps that and barriers that should be addressed this time, and how these gaps can be filled through different countries' context, or in your country's context? Yes, over to you. I think he's not with us. Zainab, um, Zainab, can we take you?
Yes, Salia,
Yes.
sure.
Yes, thank you, Zainab, for joining us. So, given the debate which is going on the inclusive NDCs, so how do you see that the NDCs this time could be inclusive in terms like that we have submitted the two NDCs, NDCs 1.0 and 2.0. So how do you see that? What are the gaps and challenges that needs to be addressed this time in the country context of Pakistan? Yes, over to you.
Thank you so much, Salia, and apologies for any kind of noise or disturbance since I'm on the road. But I wanted to join this webinar, and it's very much relevant. And thanks to Dr. Michael Williamson for raising the flags and for also highlighting the priorities that Global South should develop. I think in context of Pakistan, there are many learnings from NDCs 2.0, as also highlighted by Dr. Khalid, around firstly, the NDCs that were developed, they were quite ambitious and also impractical in a sense that we were relying on the international financing resources without any action mapping or priority metrics around where exactly, in context of whether that was renewable energy, even commercializing renewable energy or domestic renewable energy, where exactly the financing was needed, right? So this plan of action was missing throughout. So that's why we were not able to achieve the exact targets that we have set for within NDCs 2.0. And then in context of institutional and governance frameworks, I think the major learning was that at that time, climate action remained fragmented across multiple ministries. It was not prioritized as key development agenda, and because of poor interagency coordination, that led to many delays in implementation, right? And then there was another key gap, that was provincial federal misalignment. Why? Because I believe provinces were not very much integrated or made part of NDCs 2.0. So that was the major learning. And as Dr. Khalid also highlighted, the MRV system. So MRV system is crucial for tracking progress and refining the policies effectively in context of climate awareness. So when coming back to NDC 3.0, I think this time we are more aligned in a sense that we are working towards achieving or mentioning those targets that we think within our existing capacities are possible or doable. Then secondly, as it's the mandate of GCIAC, they are very much collaborating with provinces, with the CSOs, with the and also focusing more towards private sector and the people component, as mentioned by Dr. Khalid. So I think in that perspective, NDCs 3.0 has a more forward-looking approach. Then there was private sector misalignment was also there in NDCs 2.0 when they were not included, and then absence of clear incentive mechanism and risk sharing mechanisms was missing at that point. So this time private sector alignment in a way that they are being made the planning process around NDC 2.0. So I think in that perspective or context, it's more a good approach, an inclusive approach in context of NDC 3.0. And coming towards strengthening the overall framework alignment and setting the targets for NDC 3.0, I think one priority area that around which the entire NDCs will be building, and we understand that since it is also a macroeconomic issue when we talk about climate change, so we have to come up with more business plans around business projects around climate so that we can access international financing. But we need to identify the local climate funding stream as well before we move on with submitting our NDCs. So that's my key proposition in context of NDCs 3.0, that realizing that we also have our local climate funding stream, but we have not been able to assess its capabilities or potential. So I think if we build on that, it will be quite easier to develop or set those targets that Pakistan can achieve in a practical sense. Yes, over to you, Salia.
Yes, thank you very much, Zainab. And while traveling, you were, responding the questions very rightly, and you rightly said that businesses in Pakistan should need an economic case for the more inclusive NDCs. Without this, we cannot force them to be on the ambitious targets that the countries have set for the NDCs, which we have done previously in 2.0 and 1.0. So moving forward, we will come to you again for the second round as well. So moving forward, now I would request Ms. Mariana Esbiado. She's the Senior Research Analyst, Wood Mackenzie at Brazil. So, ma'am, given that Brazil has, submitted its NDC 3.0, so Brazil has made significant, strides in implementing MRV system for emission tracking. So what are the lessons that the countries of South Asia should learn from their Brazil's experience to enhance their MRV systems so that we ensure transparency and accountability in NDCs 3.0? Yes, over to you.
Hi, hello. So I'm Marina. I'm from Brazil. Yes, it's a really great opportunity to be here. So talking a little bit about Brazil's experience with the NDC. Just to give a overall context, Brazil NDCs basically the main target is to reduce emissions, right? So we have this main target, which is to reach net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2050. And we also have intermediary target, which is by 2035, we should reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 67% below 2005 levels. So Brazil NDC has a really like let's put it like this, like a macro level goal, right? And in the middle of the document, it also states that one of the country's goal is to accelerate the process of a just energy transition. So we can say that social inclusiveness is part of Brazil NDC, right? The NDC recognizes that we also need to go through this social justice process while we are going through this net zero transition, which we can say is already a step ahead of many countries. However, I don't believe that this by itself leads to a true impact on community scale. Because also like Dr. Hallett mentioned, there is a big difference between ambition and execution, right? And we still lack solidated, clear sector pathways, right? So it's the same for Brazil. We still lack a proper action plan. We did make some considerable progresses, particularly last year we were able to promote the energy transition with more focus on the climate finance aspect of it. So we had two important laws that were approved in 2025. One of them was the Future Fuel Law, which has a more focus on promoting sustainable mobility, biofuels, and there is also a 45 billion finance package associated with this in order to foster these technologies, right? But I particularly wanted to mention here about the Energy Transition Acceleration Program, which is a program that was also approved in the end of 2024, and that has a more focus on and it creates a green fund. And this green fund, the idea is to allow companies to access credit from this dedicated fund to finance energy transition related tools. And one of the proposals within this program is to allow companies that want to use these funds to, for example, install photovoltaic panels on their premises, the excess of energy that they are not going to use, that is being produced by these solar panels, and the company is not using itself, should be directed to residential units of low-income families. So this is an example of how, even though the NDC has a more macro level target, we can still do on the side other initiatives, and within these initiatives have more focused targets, right? Have a more proper plan. But this is still not enough. The thing is, we need a lot more of this. And we are still also behind in that sense. And in general, I think the main thing is that we need to not only have these proper plans focused on the implementation of what the country needs, what the population of the country needs, but they have to be solid in a way that can protect from the external context as well, right? So what we saw in Baku is that all three pillars of the energy transition, which mean affordability, security, sustainability, they all look precarious as governments of around the world are struggling to keep them in balance with their domestic demands, right? We have so many things going on right now. We have geopolitical questions, global trade tensions, wars happening in Ukraine, Gaza, the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and all these external contexts, it creates challenges. So for example, for Brazil, this has a direct impact, even though we have these side initiatives happening in a solid way in the country, we are still being impacted by all these external factors, because once major economies such as the US are saying that energy transition is no longer a priority, the first effect of this is a reduction in the volume of global resources for energy transition projects. And this has a direct impact on Brazil, for example, through the withdrawing of investments, for example, from multilateral banks or even private banks, despite the fact that we have a development bank which is working to a national development bank which is working to finance these projects. We know that Brazil, as many of the other global South countries, has various fiscal limitations, and the participation of international banks is an essential aspect for the advancement of this type of projects. So this all represents major headwinds, and I think the way to protect ourselves from this is to have a strong domestic plan, right? Strong national plan. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mariana. We will come to you later, and of course, Brazil have submitted the great ambitious plan for the NDC, especially on the emission reduction targets, climate neutrality, deforestation initiatives by the Brazil, and energy transition. How you can actually phase out the gradual phase out of fossil fuels. That was incredible, and climate justice and social inclusion. That was the part of the NDC. So as you are the host of the COP30, so you can, this is a very important place and important point where you can convince the countries that how, or debate around the inclusive NDCs, that how we can make the nations encouraged towards the climate commitments and enhance their commitments towards the NDCs 3.0. Yeah, we will come to you later for the more debate on that. So moving towards our next speaker, Miss Delima Noor Ramadani. So, ma'am, as the climate action is inclusive, and how do you see that countries who have submitted 3.0 NDCs ensure that marginalized communities, women, and youth are actively involved in the climate adaptation and mitigation efforts? And also, how do you see what are the barriers or challenges that should be overcome in the NDC 3.0? Yes, over to you. Ms. Delima, can you hear us?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you for having me, first of all. And yeah, it's very interesting discussions about inclusiveness. I could only speak in the Indonesian context, of course. And so far in Indonesia, we see that the process of the making NDC, especially the NDC 3.0, they are currently developing, showing lacks procedural transparency, where the government doesn't really communicate it very transparently in the process. So back in August, they have the public communications and telling public to submit their recommendation to improve the NDC 3.0, and then they open around 1 week of time for everyone to submit their recommendation, but that's it. We don't know what's improved. We don't know whether or not our recommendations is highlighted, and we are, as a civil society and concerned citizen, also demanding them to be more transparent in the future. And also this is also related to the inclusiveness, of course, how the government actually living those claims in the document, that they already include the local people, indigenous people, and more that are actually very affected by the climate change. But in the document, they mentioned that they already had the consultations and stuff, but there are a lot of grassroots CSOs in Indonesia or think tanks saying the other thing. So this is still a big homework for Indonesia, I think, to really take into account and improve the inclusiveness. But I think the government is also preparing more on that area where, for example, in the next NDC 3.0, the government will have specific chapter on the just transition, which highlighting the critical points on, for example, energy transitions, like they're planning to have specific law to ensure that the transition would be just, align with the well-being of the workers and not only the new jobs and etc., which is a very, very, very good development, I would say, to increase this aspect of just in the documents of NDC, which previously we observed in the previous document wasn't there. It was mentioned explicitly that the transition would happen in a just way, but there's no explicit pledge or promise that they will have measures to ensure actually that transition would happen in a just manner. I think that's a little bit about the state on how the inclusiveness is integrated in the current or in the next NDC in the case of Indonesia. And to the second point you were mentioning is about the barrier to overcome. So please let me know if it's about the to overcome the barrier to increase the NDC ambition level, or is it related to the inclusiveness you mentioned earlier? Could you please clarify a little bit?
Yes, can you please repeat the sentence?
Yeah, you're mentioning what are the barriers, right? About
Yes.
Is it the barriers to increase the NDC, or is it the barriers
No,
to
like I'm talking about the barriers, or that the barriers you have committed in NDC 1.0 and 2.0, or how you think that these barriers can be overcome in NDC 3.0, or any challenges you wanted to highlight in that context?
Yeah, so the things is numerically the NDC process, Indonesia already submitted a lot of NDC from the first updated and then enhanced, and then now the second NDC is coming. And we can see that numerically it is more ambitious, and the government is more and more synchronizing the target. Also with the LTS, Indonesia has LTS, even though not really committed when will be we will reach net zero, but we're kind of observing a scenario that we could reach net zero by 2060 or sooner. And the government seems like they're aligning more policy documents in centrally, like the development plans and also the energy plans and the sectoral plan. I think the previous speaker also mentioned that streamlining these NDC target into sectoral wise that actually has the roadmap on that, it would be very important. And then I think Indonesia is going towards that, and it's very good that the energy sector now has plan until 2060, and then the government also informed that the plan now is informed by the global stock, so we can see some words of energy efficiency and then phase down and etc., which is very good. I think the barrier now is mostly on the political situation. I think now Indonesia has new administrations that might have a different perspective, of course, than the previous one. And then now the changes of the policy documents also happen in the same time. So there's a kind of disagreement on where the climate action should take, like the government, it looks like a mixed picture of like expanding renewables, but also relying on coal. Like the government made statement that coal are the cornerstone of the energy transition, whatever that means. And it's just so confusing. I think that's the barrier, the first barrier that has to be broken down in Indonesia is the over reliance on fossil fuel. So I hope the next NDC could address, like have a clear political statement or strong political statement on ending the coal, actually, like explicitly, and also limit or ending the deforestation as well, because in the follow sector, Indonesia has very ambitious target to be net sink by 2030, but as of now, the sector is still emitting sector. It's still, the emission is still positive, and we need a very sharp reductions to reach that ambitious target. And then the NDC, even the draft of the NDC 3.0 already showing a stronger commitment, like informing that the peak emission would happen averagely in 2030, and for energy sector in 2035. So we could see that Indonesia very reliant on a steep reduction to 2060 to reach net zero, and it risks a lot of things that a strong and then disruptive action would be expected to happen after 2035, but not before 2030, which is very risky, I would say. I think that's the biggest challenge, of course, in the energy sector, and then also in the follow sector, to really making the trend or tweak the emission down. But it doesn't seem like where we are going. Emission trend are rising, and even with the next NDC, even though it's numerically more ambitious than the previous NDCs, it's still going to make Indonesia's emission going up. And it's against what globally agreed in the GST, that we have to
Thank
have
you. Thank you so much,
emissions.
Dalima. We will come to you again
Mhm.
for the second round as well. So and now we are moving toward the second round of discussion. And now I would request Zainab. Zainab, as you're heading a circular economy center, so how do you see that regional collaboration and knowledge sharing platforms could be strengthened, especially in the context of NDCs? And you are also working on the circular policy of Pakistan as well. So how do you see that these platforms could be strengthened, and these platforms could be helpful in the regional collaboration? Yes, over to you, Zainab.
So I think that's a very interesting question, Salia, because I work in this sector. So there's one thing I've realized is that there are so many great learnings from within the region when we are talking about circularity specifically. Especially if we consider the small and medium enterprises and the youth bulbs that we have, the innovative ideas and solutions that they are presenting all the time. So I think one of the key strategies that the regions like South Asia, Africa region, any region in the global south should adopt. I think Africa region is very well integrated. It's the Asia region that's not very well integrated in context of climate diplomacy. So that's my personal opinion based on the research. I might be wrong, but it's something I have observed. So I think in that context, intra-regional diplomacy is extremely important. Coming up with platforms where multi-crisis diplomacy, engaging the youth, engaging the stakeholders from civil society, engaging the stakeholders from academia can play a very important role when we are talking about knowledge transfer. Engaging them through MOUs, through collaborations, through providing them a platform that is neutral, where they can exclusively debate their take, their ideas, and share their solutions. I think that can be the key, one of the key towards achieving, when we talk about one voice in context of climate change, that's how regions can do that. And then also collaborating with other regions, exploring non-traditional donors. We are very much relying on traditional larger donors, and we are not willing to, open ourselves to non-traditional donors. They don't have to be larger donors, they have to be more localized, because they can come up with those solutions that that can be tailored as per the local regional demands and needs. We need to be more inclusive of our own regional needs first. So I think in that context, circular economy, yes, now Pakistan is coming up with its own national circular economy policy, and we are trying to make it a benchmark policy by connecting it with NDCs. It's going to be related with NDCs because this sector has a huge potential, not only in context of waste or in context of efficient resources that we are utilizing, but also in context of how we connect the different resource mobilization when we talk about innovation, right? So this sector has that niche of innovation that can be integrated. Apart from that, I think another key aspect that I very much look forward to is like ASEAN region has its own circular economy forum. Coming towards South Asia, I think South Asia needs to strengthen more and connect with more other Asian countries in context of circular economy, climate change, and the knowledge transfer and capacity building. Yes, funding will remain a challenge, and we have to be practical about it, but then what about knowledge transfer and technical capacities that we can link together? So that's my take. Multi-crisis diplomacy. Coming back towards NDCs 3.0, as I mentioned, Pakistan's NDCs, we are trying our best that it becomes a forward-looking document that we submit, right? But again, we need to explore those sectors as well, which have not been, which are not much talked about, and where scale of innovation, scale of financing is more. So circular economy is one of them, and I'm really glad that it was this first time at COP29, circular economy was given center stage at negotiation table by many developing countries from the global south region. And I think through this kind of collaboration, through this kind of mechanism that is very much successful in MENA region and in Africa region, global south region and South Asia can also and Asia overall can also learn from it. So yes, that's my take. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Zainab, and very rightly highlighted around the circular economy and policy around working around it. And we are hoping that this time, after the policy came and the challenges should be highlighted, and that's how the inclusive, approach or work should be done with the partners or with the communities as well. So we have to look globally as well as locally that how these NDCs should be inclusive in terms of local community approach or local community financing mechanisms or their practices as well. Yes. With this, like we are also in Pakistan or right now working on the NDC 3.0, and this time the approach is that we approach the provincial governments as well, the department or the organization who is the focal person of the NDCs, GCISC. They are very actively participating this time with the local with the provincial governments, and we are hoping that this time that NDCs must be inclusive in terms of provincial buy-in in that as well. Now I would request Dr. Khalid Waleed, as he's an energy economy expert. So, Dr. Khalid, given the NDCs, we are talking about that how they should be inclusive. So, how do you see in terms of both economic and environmental planning that could be part of the NDCs to make it more ambitious, inclusive, and also achievable? Yes, over to you.
Yeah, Salha, thank you so much. I'll build upon the previous speakers. They have built a very good case that it should be inclusive, it should be linked with economic priorities, pathways, particularly sectoral pathways. What I see is NDCs, if I put it in an algebraic equation form, NDC should be equal to an equation that contains economy, energy, and climate. And if these three are equal, then we have this implementable, efficient, inclusive climate change NDCs. Why I am saying this? Because in Pakistan right now, there is a crisis in terms of economy. We have a trade deficit, we have a fiscal deficit, and we have a crisis in energy side, in which we have built this so much installed capacity which is underutilized, and now we are paying capacity charges for that installed capacity, and most of it is either coal power plants or fossil fuel based power plants. So and why these are connected with environment or increased emission, that we want to decarbonize our power sector, but at the same time we have economic priorities as well, and that those economic priorities are how to make electricity sector more affordable, how to bring inflation down. So maybe one very key thing or key priority or key implementation path for the NDCs is link these two sectors together, bring an integrated plan that is governed by economic rule, but also bring the decarbonization agenda into the fold as well. For example, if Pakistan make use of these just energy transition partnerships or Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism and early retire some of the coal power plants, that could be Pakistan's way of getting rid of these fixed charges or underutilized power plants. So maybe economic plan governing decarbonization of energy sector, linking it with environment side or the climate side, that would be a key for Pakistan's multifaceted challenge. Second thing that I see is that now the electricity prices, tariff, they are high. The people have take matters to their own hand, and now more and more solar panels on the rooftop of Pakistan. You'll see that they are coming along, and with that, at one front, we are tackling this high energy prices crisis. On the second hand, we are obviously decarbonizing in it because the national grid's demand is declining and we have to not utilize our fossil fuel based power plants. But it again sort of creates a dilemma for Pakistan that as electricity demand goes down for the national grid, we have fixed charges and we have long-term PPAs. uh, the burden remains the same. So we need to navigate in a way that we make use of the utility of these initiatives, such as just transition partnerships, uh, uh, energy transition mechanisms. But for that, we need have this holistic approach where we make use of green skills, we make use of technology transfer, we make use of integrated energy plus integrated economy planning. But again, I'll move back to my original point that the climate prosperity or the NDCs, they should be part of integral part of countries' development projection, countries' development programs, so that we make a holistic plan, we make a plan that caters for not just the climate part of it, but the finance and the energy part of it, so that this holistic planning can be done. Lastly, my point would be that maybe if the climate finance is not available and we have these uh, conditional targets, what we can do is we can find these economic solutions that Zainab talked about and build on the local economy. But again, we need to find out that what is the right balance between uh, economy, economic policies, energy policies, and climate change policies, and bringing those together, we can build a local economy on it, and then from there we can take off in terms of building this economic agenda or economic engine in front of these crises. So again, the focus should be how to solve economic crisis through actionable environmental or climate responsive planning. In that way, maybe politicians, maybe uh, the stakeholders that are relevant, that can be mobilized and it can be mainstreamed in such a way that NDCs are a solution to not only Pakistan's environmental problem, our country's environmental problem. It should be a solution to Pakistan's energy sector problem and economic problems as well. In that way, we can sort of generate this debate around economy, energy, and environment. So that would be one way to mainstream it in policy sector.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you
back to
so
you.
much, Dr. Khalid, for highlighting the Pakistan case, especially the economic case in that sense as well. So moving forward for the second round, I would request Ms. Mariana, since Brazil have submitted its NDCs, and with the establishment of Article 6 framework, how can South Asian nations, develop the interoperable carbon market systems that align with international standards, facilitating effective participation in global carbon trading? Yes, over to you. Yes, Miss Mariana, can you hear us? If she left. So, Michael, there's a question in the chat box. If you wanted to highlight the concerns that showed over the question. Uh, Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear just fine.
Yeah. So,
I just wonder if
so
you could
if you
read
can
out the
respond to the
question.
question, or I should repeat it. So basically, they're asking about the Thailand's approach. Right now, the Pakistan NDCs are more towards the adaptation side due to the vulnerability. So Thailand has, make a balanced approach on the mitigation and transition towards the low carbon economy. So how do you see that this best, approach could be incorporated in the South Asian context? Yes.
Yeah, so obviously with NDC, there has to be a balance between mitigation and adaptation. Both have to be there. It's true that Pakistan is very climate exposed for a number of reasons. I mean, Thailand is too, but for slightly different reasons, I suppose. But there is a big difference between the countries. I think actually, if you look at renewable energy resource endowment, Pakistan is much better off in terms of solar and wind. It doesn't perhaps have the grid infrastructure to evacuate a lot of the wind power and perhaps the solar power, particularly in Baluchistan, where a lot of the resources are. But in Thailand, you don't have a great quality wind resource. So mainly they're looking at solar, they're looking at floating solar. But to really get the full value out of that, the full penetration, you probably need to do a lot of batteries as well. One thing that Thailand looks at itself as really kind of a manufacturing hub in Southeast Asia, because they have a big automotive industry and they're really getting serious on EVs. Not only do they want people to use EVs, they want to manufacture them as well. And I think that perhaps that's one lesson for Pakistan because, 70 million people in Thailand, Pakistan, a much bigger population, around 280 million people, growing GDP, a big market for these sorts of things. And if you go to Pakistan, you see, in Pakistan, people have their own ride-hailing apps. There's indigenous technology, indigenous ride-hailing apps, as one example. And I think Pakistan could also look at how it takes a very, large-scale approach to scaling up things like EV, to doing the manufacturing or maybe the assembling to satisfy the domestic market. And even things with solar and wind, there's a lot of possibilities to do joint venture, to manufacture this, to put the jobs in Pakistan, and really find this kind of marriage of low carbon growth and economic development. Pakistan, I see, has got some advantages in its scale as well. And of course, what I didn't really touch on a lot was the regional cooperation element of SAARC. If we compare SAARC to ASEAN, we see that the level of integration and cooperation in ASEAN is very, very tight. A lot of things happening with the ASEAN power grid. The SAARC energy ring has been on the table for a long time, but not really operationalized. It would be great to see that happen because when you look at the two biggest SAARC members, India, Pakistan, to interconnect those two grids is only about 30 kilometers of line. It wouldn't take a lot. It's not a very big investment. These are kind of political level impediments. When we look at the ASEAN countries back in the 1960s, some of those members were in open conflict. So it's not impossible to resolve these challenges. So thanks a lot for the question, and I hope that I went some way towards answering it.
Thank you so much, Michael, for highlighting your concerns. And we will come to you again if there's more questions come towards you. Ms. Delima, can you hear us? Ms. Delima, are you with us?
Oh, yes.
Yes, we have started the second round. So I would like it to get an opinion on what mechanisms should be established to ensure that women and marginalized communities are not only consulted but actively involved in the decision making and implementation process of climate policies, especially to effectively address the equity of NDCs 3.0. So do you have any such examples from your country, or you have some challenges to highlight in this context? Yes, over to you.
Yeah, Indonesia has been actively working with the local communities, especially women in the rural area, to cooperate with the carbon market mechanism, where it is nationally verified. So we have a platform to verify every actions that could avoid emission loss or added sink. So start from the patrolly is usually done by men in the village. The patrolly together with the government bodies in several levels to reduce the hotspot, for example, and then planting and also social forestry and many more. I think this is very important for the government that preserving the nature would benefit them, because we know that without the local people, including women and children, women and youth in the village around the national park or around the forest, it would be impossible to conserve, and they have to generate income for them. So there are a lot of initiatives that are also supported by the government to shift those who are interacted the most or directly with the forest to benefit from it, actually, from shifting to ecotourism, and then diversifying the scheme for social forestry, mixing the forest and then also the local plantations such as coffee and cocoa and also coconut and many more. And I think it's a very good practices, but still there needs a scheme or where the local people can be involved more. But the things is sometimes local people, including women, even though they are very interested and have very much energy to actually have this activity, there's a lack of knowledge on what actually climate change is, or why is it matter for everyone, why is it matter for us, and something like that has to be improved, I think, in many countries, including Indonesia, how to make these issues is mainstream until the grassroots level. And this is what being advocating by many people here in Indonesia, to integrate climate syllabus or subject into schools, so that youth and then women and then local at the end of the day, when they're adult, they know and aware more about climate. And I think making sure that this is happening is also going to improve or affect positively to the inclusions of youth and women, and then also local people. And then I think the government usually have their site specific bodies that work with the local people. Here in Indonesia, we have around 1,500, if I'm not mistaken. We called it Climate Village, where they get funded and from donors, and then channeled to the government and channeled to them, so that they can have a livelihood that are sync with preserving the nature. And I think it's also already include the climate awareness and also good practices in maintaining the agriculture system or social forestry system, which is very good, I think.
Yes, thank you so much, Dalima, for highlighting that how the gender perspective could be added in your, NDCs, and without the involvement of the, marginalized communities, we cannot make them more inclusive. Yes, moving towards Zainab. Zainab, as the private sector is, is a driver towards achieving NDCs 3.0, and it has been estimated by the World Bank 2024 report that 2.5 trillion investment is needed by 2030 yeah, for the climate commitments as well. So many global corporations are integrating science-based targets and net zero pathways. So what lessons can South Asia businesses learn from the best practices, or how you can see that the private sector, especially in Pakistan, can make a more integrated approach towards the climate commitments of NDC 3.0. Yes, over to you.
Thank you, Salia. So I think in context of private sector, well, if we talk about learning from other regions and countries, the more a region is towards compliance side, the more effective their strategies gets in context of involving private sector. So if we see, EU is coming up with different directives, different strategies, different action plans where they're making sure that the compliance around ESG, compliance around, different international standards is there in context of disclosure and reporting, what private sector is doing. And it has to be transparent. So the greenwashing aspect gets reduced. I think this is a very positive point for private sector if they engage in disclosure reporting. Why? Because then they can efficiently reduce the greenwashing aspect that gets linked to them mostly. So that that stigma attached to the private sector, it can be managed. Secondly, if in context of Pakistan, well, I think we now have carbon pricing policy, and we also must be prepared ourselves for any kind of taxation that we'll have to face eventually, because CBAM is there. So eventually, private sector needs to be engaged in context of compliance reporting. Pakistan has already started. Well, let's say SECP has come up with its own ESG related disclosure guidelines, where they have started with the voluntary disclosure, but eventually they'll be moving towards compliance side. Then extended producer responsibility has been missing throughout the policy planning process. But under the National Circular Economy policy that we are developing, extended producer responsibility framework will be developed, and it will become part of the act or law through which the private sector must be compliant of their disclosure and reporting mechanisms. Apart from that, I think important aspect is that the public sector must provide the incentive mechanism to private sector, along with the de-risking mechanisms, along with the risk insurance and guarantees mechanism. And in that perspective, climate risk insurance is extremely important. You need to engage your not just commercial banks, not just your multinational companies and local private sector and business corporations, but also your microfinance institutions, so that everything that you do in context of policy development and enforcement, it gets trickled down to your communities. So then we have concessional financing mechanisms as well that needs to be strengthened. Now, green taxonomy is there. I'm sure there will be more work done in context of concessional financial mechanisms. Apart from that, I think providing them with easy regulatory approaches. For example, when renewable energy transition was there, issues related to PPAs arise, right? So that was a roadblocker for private sector to enhance the transition towards renewable energy transition. In that perspective, more positive and more open approaches should be provided by the public sector, so that they can set up their targets, whether that's decarbonization, whether that's net zero. As of now, private sector is a bit reluctant, but I'm sure that when NDCs 3.0 is there, because it has an inclusive approach, so private sector will be more willing to collaborate for through PPPs or through any other means to support the government in context of climate ambition. Now, you also mentioned science-based targets initiative. Science-based targets initiative is one of the initiatives that makes them comply, voluntarily, or on the other way around, to start reporting their overall their operations, etc. But I think the local governments need to come up with their own disclosure reporting mechanism as well, so that whether that's in the form of any tax, whether that's in the form of any compliance mechanism, so that private sector becomes more, it becomes easier for them to do it locally. Once they do it locally, it will be easier for them to do it with international clients as well. And I think for private sector, linking their CSR with ESG and overall sustainability agenda is one of the key areas where they can improve their strategic development in context of achieving the climate ambition and climate agenda. So that's my take on your question, Saleha.
Yes, thank you so much, Zainab. Very detailed highlighted about the private sector role and how they can be pitched in into to make the NDCs more inclusive towards the Pakistan. We have also, I think, chat box is filled, and we have one more question regarding the internationally transferable mitigation outcomes. Since after the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the NDCs are the tradable commodities, and but since there are a lot of challenges in the South Asian perspective on the limited market infrastructure and regulatory challenges that hindered the adoption of these type of initiatives in South Asia. So how we can overcome these policy challenges, and how we can enhance the framework for the governance to enhance the participation for in the carbon markets. If I think Dr. Khalid, if you can respond on that.
Yes, Saliha, thank you so much. What I understand is that how we can again build an economic engine, we need to sort of bring it in a narrative that now the climate policies, the climate change agendas, they are part of macroeconomic planning as well. So we need to use where we can use the leverage, economic leverage. One of the very effective tool is to use these ITMOs. Maybe that will attract not only the public sector, but the private sector as well, so that we can make it a tradable commodity. We sort of build our economic plans around it, and in this process, we will be decarbonizing, we will be having economic growth. If I bring in the theoretical economics in the fold, there is environmental Kuznets curve, and environmental Kuznets curves give you this inverted U-shaped non-linear relationship between economic growth or income with uh, environmental degradation. In first half of this inverted U, when you increase your income, environmental degradation is bound to happen because you are developing, your industries are developing. But in the second phase, there is an inverse relationship between economic growth or income with environmental degradation. So in that way, you have linked your economic priorities with mitigation or decarbonization agenda. So in that way, we need to sort of first build this discourse, and then we'll have regulatory framework. And again, this might take a toll on economy in terms of maybe carbon taxation, maybe in terms of discouraging these fossil fuel-based economies. But we need to sort of link it with in economic priorities and then build upon it. Pakistan's uh, recently introduced the guidebook or policy for carbon markets, or Article 6. It clearly states that we need to sort of have these economic engines for environmental or climate change practices. So why not make use of it and bring more clarity in terms of how these ITMOS framework will be used. I like Michael's point that energy cooperation should be there in the region, but environmental cooperation should also be in the region where we can develop these joint markets of carbon trading, and we kickstart these carbon trading as not just for the environment. Maybe obviously it is for the climate change and climate financing, a market-based approach, but it should be linked to the economic priorities as well. So if the regional trading in carbon markets started. So maybe we can sort of generate these ICMOs, and we can then trade with global north as well. So maybe regulatory frameworks, policy frameworks, but it will not work without the cooperation from Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, and the private sector. So we need to have this holistic sort of approach so that we have these functional markets. And one last point, these ITMOs, the finances generated through carbon credits, it should be used for the welfare of the communities. Those are vulnerable to climate change or climate catastrophes. Without sort of incorporating this equitability, I think the carbon markets would again be a false tool. So we need to sort of bring together the market efficiency, the right kind of regulatory environment, the public-private partnership, plus the community stance, community-centric approaches, so that the revenues generated through carbon markets, through ITMOs, that sort of help out those who obviously needs help in terms of climate vulnerability. Back to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalid, for rightly highlighted the economic and environmental challenges that could be highlighted or incorporated in the NDCs 3.0. And definitely many countries like the Switzerland also, before going to the Article 6.2 modalities, they signed the bilateral agreements with so many countries where they can see that there is an export competitiveness, or they can be traded as well. So we also looked into that context as well, that which are the industrial sectors that we can we see the export oriented sectors that could be taken into that context as well. Yes, with this, thank you so much with our extreme panelists, Michael, Delima, Mariana, and Zainab. Thank you so much for your time, and it was very wonderful discussion. And we are hoping that we will make a position paper against the recommendations and the suggestions you have put down in that webinar. And as Pakistan is about to submitted its NDCs, and we are in the process, and I think such dialogues could be very significant and helpful in developing the broader context, and so that we can make for the Pakistan or for the South Asia, the NDCs should be more inclusive and more ambitious, and more towards the demand of the country, or the tailored approach the country should adopt. So thank you so much, and everyone, and have a good day.